To understand this part of the Emporium, the green side of the EcoHome coin, one must first understand the meaning behind its name. Bensingkong. For those who don't speak Indonesian, Bensingkong is an amalgamation of two Indonesian words. Bensin, the word for gasoline, and singkong, the Indonesian word for cassava. Loosely translated, Bensingkong means cassava fuel, energy from cassava roots, or to be frank, fuel from biomass. You see, the fuel that you get from cassava is the exact same kind of fuel you can extract from corn, or sorghum, or wheat, or even potatoes, and really any kind of crop that produces starch, and that kind of fuel is bioethanol. Cassava are perhaps some of the toughest plants out there. They can tolerate many different kinds of soils. They can even stand the poorest ones. And in harsh climates, cassava can still survive. In extremely cold temperatures, and even in droughts, cassava undergo long periods of hibernation. They remain dormant until the weather becomes warm and the soil fresh with water. And when conditions are right, they immediately grow again as if nothing had happened. And what's more, cassava are perennial plants. Whereas many plants only last months before harvest, cassava can last for years. Harvest times can last from 6 to 24 months after planting. And also, unlike other plants, cassava aren't usually cultivated from seeds. No, cassava are cultivated simply by cutting off a portion of the stem and planting it on soil in a complex process. And in Indonesia, cassava is simply abundant. Each year, about 15 to 17 million tons of cassava are produced. They're practically everywhere. In rural areas, developing cassava is cheaper and easier than using alternative sources of energy like solar power, wind power, and hydropower. And as a source of ethanol, there are many ways people living in rural areas can turn cassava into electricity. The first step, hydrolysis, breaks down the starch within the cassava into its base sugars. Although cassava doesn't contain the sugar necessary to make alcohol, it does contain the starch and the carbohydrates needed to make those sugars. In many instances, often in industrial settings, it's a complicated, taxing process, but it can be replicated in smaller settings and turned into a process that people in rural areas can reproduce for themselves. In fact, when brewing the alcohol itself, we were able to use household materials to great effect. And really, once hydrolysis is done, the starch in the cassava is converted into its base sugars, perfect for fermenting to alcohol. This is where the second step of the process, fermentation, comes in. It's probably the least tedious step of this process, because in fermentation, the broth is simply sealed with yeast for 2 weeks or more, and it's during this time that the yeast within converts the sugars of the cassava into alcohol. Any airtight container can be used in this process, and there are many different methods of doing this that can utilize old or recycled materials. When it comes to the third step, distillation, the alcohol in the broth is extracted by a distiller tank, finally producing ethanol. This part of the process is where, if provided with the right equipment, people in rural areas can thrive. It's in this part where students can empower themselves, where they can make ethanol, create their own fuel. Because with ethanol, electricity isn't just a possibility, it's inevitable. As a fuel, ethanol has been a long-standing alternative to more traditional fuels. In fact, the original T-Mobile developed by Henry Ford ran on an ethanol gasoline blend. Yet, ethanol was pushed back for many years and remained in the background of the fuel industry for many decades. But today, ethanol has been becoming increasingly important as an alternative to its more traditional counterparts. Its flexibility, carbon neutrality, and sustainability is driving its presence in not only the global market, but in Indonesia too. As a flexible fuel, ethanol is perhaps the easiest alternative fuel to integrate into our machines and into generators for producing electricity, as low-level ethanol blends can be used in normal gasoline generators without the need for special equipment. It's possible to use higher-level blends in normal generators, drastically reducing equipment costs. It also helps that ethanol has a much higher octane number than gasoline, making it a far more superior breed of efficiency compared to its traditional counterparts. Furthermore, ethanol has proven itself time and again as a fuel low in carbon emissions. Unlike traditional fuels, refined and energy-intensive and environmentally harmful processes from petroleum under the ground, ethanol's carbon emissions are balanced out by the oxygen produced by the plants they come from. It's carbon neutral, and it's already being used as a way to oxygenate traditional fuels for cleaner, greener results. And as a sustainable resource, ethanol won't be going away anytime soon. After all, farms aren't the same as oil reserves. They can last long after the last dregs of petroleum have dried out. In rural communities, ethanol poses an efficient and flexible solution, something easy to integrate, sustainable enough for the long haul, and beneficial for the environment. For them and for us, it's the game changer that's been hiding under our noses all along. It isn't exactly groundbreaking, but it's enough to level the playing field. And right now, that's all that matters. The EcoHome's vision centers on change, and as an essential part of its mission, Bensingkong lays the bedrock for its vision. In Indonesia, our problems start in the very foundations of our society, in our food, in our water, in our homes, in our schools, in our energy. For Indonesia, change starts small. What we need is a solution that starts at the root of the problem, that starts with the people who live in the cracks of our foundations, something that grows from the ground up. And if cassava roots can do it, then let's. Because change in Indonesia is slow. In many ways, it's like cassava. It starts with a seed, or even a stem. It grows eventually, but it takes months. It takes droughts where it hibernates, cold seasons where it cowers in the ground, but it grows. It grows and it thrives, and it eats and it breathes, and bit by bit it learns to live. Change doesn't happen, it becomes. And becoming is a slow, arduous process. See, we aren't here to start a revolution. We aren't out here to break the game. We're out here to make progress. And sometimes that's enough.